The kids at Jefferson Elementary loved their crossing guard. He knew every child by name, remembered their birthdays, and always had a spare Band-Aid in his pocket. When little Emma scraped her knee, he was there. When Tommy forgot his lunch money, he quietly slipped him $1. The community saw a kind old man who'd found his calling in keeping children safe. They had no idea that keeping people safe had been his calling for over 20 years, in places where the stakes were life and death, and there were no second chances. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we continue this powerful story of hidden courage and unexpected heroism, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who protect us in ways we never see coming. Charlie Morrison had been standing at the corner of Maple and 3rd Street for exactly 5 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Not that anyone was counting except Charlie himself, who kept mental notes about everything that mattered. Every morning at 7:30 sharp, he'd emerge from his small apartment 3 blocks away, reflective vest already fastened, stop sign polished clean, and a thermos of black coffee that would last him until the final bell. The children called him Mr. Charlie, though his name was actually Charles Edward Morrison, a name that had once appeared on classified documents and mission briefings that most people weren't cleared to read. But here, on this quiet suburban corner, he was just the friendly crossing guard who made sure everyone got to school safely. He was 62 years old, stood 5'8" in his worn New Balance sneakers, and had gray hair that he kept trimmed military short out of habit. The parents thought he was probably a retired bus driver, maybe a former shop owner who needed something to do with his time. They were polite enough, morning nods, occasional small talk about the weather, but they never really looked at him, not really. If they had, they might have noticed that Charlie's eyes never stopped moving, that he positioned himself to see every angle of the intersection, that his grip on the stop sign was firm and tactical, never casual, that when he helped a child tie their shoe, he was simultaneously scanning rooftops and noting which cars had been parked in the same spots for too long. But what they saw was what Charlie wanted them to see, a gentle man who had found purpose in protecting their children. And in many ways, that was exactly who he was.
Emma Rodriguez was 7 years old, had pigtails that never stayed neat, and a tendency to skip instead of walk. She was also Charlie's first friend at Jefferson Elementary, though she didn't know it. On his 3rd day on the job, she tripped on the curb and scraped her knee badly enough to draw blood and tears. While other adults might have called for the school nurse, Charlie had calmly knelt down, produced a Mickey Mouse Band-Aid from his vest pocket, and cleaned the wound with the kind of practiced efficiency that only came from treating injuries under much more serious circumstances. "There you go, sweetheart," he'd said in his quiet voice. "Good as new." Emma had stopped crying immediately, more fascinated by the fact that this nice man carried cartoon Band-Aids than worried about her knee. From that day forward, she made sure to say good morning to Mr. Charlie every single day, usually accompanied by a detailed report about her cat, her homework, or whatever 7-year-old drama was currently consuming her world. Tommy Chen was 8, the kind of kid who forgot things constantly, lunch money, homework, permission slips, and who lived with his grandmother while his parents worked double shifts at the hospital. Tommy had learned not to ask for things, because asking made his grandmother worry about money they didn't have. But somehow, Charlie always seemed to know when Tommy was standing at the lunch line empty-handed. "Hey, buddy," Charlie would say quietly, slipping a folded $5 bill into Tommy's backpack when no one was looking. "Found this on the sidewalk earlier. Must have fallen out of someone's bag." Tommy was smart enough to know that money didn't just fall out of bags, but he was also smart enough to know that Mr. Charlie was giving him a way to accept help without feeling ashamed. The lunch money became a regular thing, though neither of them ever mentioned it directly. There was Maria Santos, who spoke mostly Spanish at home and was still building confidence with English. Charlie had started learning basic Spanish phrases just so he could wish her good morning in a way that made her smile. There was David Kumar, who was getting bullied by older kids and had started taking longer and longer routes to avoid them, until Charlie quietly adjusted his position to keep an eye on David's usual path and made sure the bullying stopped, with nothing more than a steady look and a few quiet words. For 5 years, Charlie had been building these small relationships, creating a network of trust and safety that extended far beyond the crosswalk. The teachers appreciated how smoothly drop-off and pickup went. The parents liked that their children spoke fondly of the crossing guard,
The principal had even written Charlie a letter of commendation for his dedication and the way he'd reduced pedestrian incidents to zero.
But what none of them knew was that Charles Edward Morrison had spent 23 years as a Navy SEAL, with tours in Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, and places that didn't appear on official records. He'd led counterterrorism operations, conducted hostage rescues, and spent more time than he cared to remember in situations where split-second decisions meant the difference between going home and being carried home. He'd retired with commendations he couldn't display, stories he couldn't tell, and a Medal of Honor that he kept in a drawer wrapped in a flag that had draped too many coffins. The transition to civilian life had been harder than any mission he'd ever completed. The quiet was too loud. The safety felt fragile. The knowledge that most people had no idea how thin the line was between order and chaos kept him awake at night. That's when he'd seen the posting for a school crossing guard. The pay was minimal, the hours were short, the responsibilities seemed almost insulting compared to what he'd been trained to do. But something about it felt right. Children represented everything he'd spent his career protecting: innocence, future, hope. If he couldn't serve his country on foreign battlefields anymore, maybe he could serve his community by making sure the most vulnerable made it safely across one intersection every day. He'd applied under his real name, passed the background check without any flags. His service record was classified in ways that made him appear to be a perfectly ordinary veteran, and started the job with the same dedication he'd brought to every mission. The first year had been an adjustment, learning to move slowly instead of with tactical precision, learning to appear relaxed when every instinct told him to stay alert, learning to be patient with chaos that wasn't life-threatening, just the normal, controlled chaos of children being children. But he'd found something he hadn't expected: peace. These children trusted him completely, the way civilians had once trusted him to keep them safe from threats they couldn't see. The difference was that here, the threats were mostly skinned knees and forgotten lunch money instead of bullets and bombs. Or so he'd thought. Tuesday, March 15th started like every other day. Charlie was at his position by 7:30, watching the familiar flow of families heading toward school. Emma Rodriguez skipped up to him with a loose tooth to show off. Tommy Chen was already looking worried about something, probably a test he'd forgotten to study for. Maria Santos shyly practiced saying good morning in English while her mother smiled approvingly. The morning rush was winding down, most children already inside the building, when Charlie heard the sound that changed everything. Pop, pop, pop. Most people would have dismissed it as a car backfiring, maybe construction noise from the renovation project 2 blocks over, but Charlie had heard that sound too many times in too many places to mistake it for anything other than what it was: gunfire. Close range. Inside the school, his body reacted before his mind finished processing. 23 years of training kicked in with muscle memory that hadn't faded despite 5 years of crosswalk duty. His hand moved instinctively to where his sidearm used to rest, finding only empty air and a crossing guard vest. That's when he saw them. 3 men in dark clothing moving purposefully toward the school's main entrance. They moved with a kind of coordination that told Charlie this wasn't random. This was planned, and they were carrying weapons that definitely weren't meant for hunting or sport shooting. The first man reached the door and pulled it open. The second and third followed. Charlie could see the last few children who were running late, a group of maybe 6 kids, still 40 yards away from the entrance, laughing and completely unaware of what they were walking into. In that moment, Charles Edward Morrison had a choice. He could call 911 and wait for help to arrive, following protocol and hoping it would be enough. He could try to warn the late arriving children to run and hope they listened. Or he could do what he'd been trained to do for over 2 decades: step into danger so others didn't have to.
Charlie dropped his stop sign and started running toward the school. He'd covered maybe 20 yards when he heard the first screams from inside the building. The sound hit him like a physical blow, children's voices, high and terrified, echoing through hallways that were supposed to be safe spaces. Behind him, the group of late arrivals had stopped walking, confused by the sounds they couldn't quite identify. "Get down," Charlie shouted at them, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made people obey without question. "Behind those cars, now!" The children scattered, some crying, most too shocked to do anything but follow the crossing guard's orders. Charlie kept running. The main entrance was glass doors and windows, good for visibility on a normal day, terrible for tactical situations. Charlie could see movement inside, shadows passing quickly through the main hallway. More screams, the sound of doors slamming. He reached the entrance and paused for exactly 3 seconds, just long enough to assess what he could see. The main hallway stretched ahead of him, lined with classroom doors on both sides. Emergency lights were flashing, the lockdown alarm adding its electronic wail to the chaos. One of the gunmen was at the far end of the hall, trying to force open a classroom door where Charlie could see a teacher desperately holding it shut from the inside. The other two had split off, one toward the administrative offices, one toward what Charlie knew was the kindergarten wing. The kindergarten wing where Emma Rodriguez would be sitting in circle time, where Tommy Chen would be trying to concentrate on his math worksheet, where Maria Santos would be raising her hand to answer questions in her careful English. Charlie Morrison stepped through those doors and became someone the children had never seen before. He moved through the hallway with the kind of focused precision that had kept him alive in Fallujah and Kandahar. Every step was calculated. Every glance captured crucial information. His mind was automatically mapping exits, identifying potential weapons, calculating angles and distances. The gunman at the far end of the hall hadn't seen him yet, too focused on trying to breach the classroom door. Charlie moved along the wall, using the emergency lighting's shadows to mask his approach. 20 feet. 15. 10. The man spun around just as Charlie reached him. What happened next took exactly 4 seconds, though it felt both instant and eternal. The gunman raised his weapon. Charlie moved with muscle memory that had been drilled into him through thousands of hours of training. A textbook disarm, executed with the kind of precision that only came from doing it when your life depended on getting it right. The weapon clattered across the floor. The gunman went down, hard, unconscious before he hit the linoleum. Charlie picked up the rifle, a semi-automatic that made his jaw tighten with professional disgust, and checked the safety before slinging it across his back. Behind the classroom door, he could hear children's voices, still frightened, but no longer screaming. "This is Charlie Morrison," he called through the door, using the same calm voice he used every morning at the crosswalk. "You're safe now. I need you to stay exactly where you are until the police arrive." From inside, he heard Mrs. Patterson's voice, shaky but relieved. "Mr. Charlie, is that really you?" "Yes, ma'am. Everything's going to be okay." But everything wasn't okay yet. There were still 2 gunmen somewhere in the building. Charlie moved toward the administrative offices, following the sound of shouting and what he hoped wasn't more gunfire. The school's layout was burned into his memory from 5 years of walking these halls during pickup time, helping lost children find their classrooms, delivering forgotten lunch boxes to the main office. He found the second gunman in the principal's office, holding the secretary and 2 administrative staff against the wall. The man was agitated, clearly not expecting any resistance, his weapon waving erratically as he shouted demands that made no tactical sense. This one took longer, 8 seconds instead of 4, because Charlie had to be more careful with civilians in the immediate vicinity. But the result was the same. Another weapon secured, another threat neutralized, another group of school staff safe. But it was the third gunman who would haunt Charlie's dreams for years afterward. He found him in the kindergarten wing, standing in the doorway of Mrs. Rodriguez's classroom, Emma's classroom, with his weapon pointed at 26 5- and 6-year-old children who were huddled in the reading corner, their teacher standing protectively in front of them with her arms spread wide. "Please," Mrs. Rodriguez was saying, her voice steady, despite the tears streaming down her face. "They're just babies. Please don't hurt them." The gunman's finger was on the trigger. Charlie could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his breathing had become rapid and shallow. This one was different from the others, more unstable, more dangerous. Charlie had a clear shot. The rifle he'd taken from the first gunman was loaded and ready. He could end this threat the same way he'd ended threats in a dozen countries, with the kind of precision shooting that had made him one of the most effective operators in SEAL team history. But there were 26 children watching. 26 children who would have to live with the memory of violence in their safe space, who would have to carry the image of their crossing guard as someone who brought danger instead of safety. Instead, Charlie did something that went against every tactical protocol he'd ever learned. He set the rifle down on the floor and stepped into the doorway, empty-handed.
"Hey there," he said in the same gentle voice he used every morning at the crosswalk. "I'm Mr. Charlie. You remember me, right?" The gunman spun toward him, weapon raised, finger still on the trigger. But Charlie wasn't looking at the gun. He was looking at Emma Rodriguez, who had recognized his voice and was peeking around her teacher's arm with wide, frightened eyes. "Hi, sweetheart," Charlie said to Emma, as if they were standing at the crosswalk instead of in the middle of a crisis. "Everything's going to be okay. Mr. Charlie's here." That's when Emma did something that stopped Charlie's heart and changed everything that happened next. She broke away from the group of children and ran toward him. "Mr. Charlie," she sobbed, wrapping her small arms around his legs. "I was scared, but I knew you'd come." The gunman hesitated, confused by the scene in front of him, a child running toward danger instead of away from it, a crossing guard who had somehow appeared in the middle of his carefully planned attack. None of it made sense. That moment of confusion was all Charlie needed. 23 years of training condensed into one fluid motion. The gunman never saw it coming. Charlie had been protecting children long before he started wearing a reflective vest, and he protected them now with the same lethal efficiency that had made him a legend in special operations communities. By the time the first police officers arrived, Charlie was sitting in the kindergarten classroom with Emma on his lap and 25 other children gathered around him in a circle. He was telling them a story about a brave little girl who helped her friend cross a very big street. His voice, calm and steady, the rifle from the hallway secured and unloaded beside Mrs. Rodriguez's desk. The children were listening with the same rapt attention they gave to story time every day, as if their crossing guard telling them tales was the most normal thing in the world. Because for them, it was. Mr. Charlie had always kept them safe. The fact that he'd done it with methods they couldn't understand didn't change the fundamental truth of who he was to them. When the SWAT team finally reached the kindergarten wing, they found something they hadn't expected: absolute calm. Children who should have been traumatized were instead seated quietly around a man who looked like an ordinary crossing guard, but moved with the controlled precision of someone who had been in similar situations before. The team leader, a veteran himself, took one look at the scene and understood immediately what had happened. He'd seen that particular kind of calm competence before, in men who had been trained to walk into chaos and create order. "Sir," he said to Charlie, using the respectful tone reserved for certain kinds of people, "are you injured?" Charlie looked up from the story he was telling, Emma still curled against his chest, other children leaning against his arms and legs like he was a favorite grandfather. "No," he said quietly, "but we're going to need some Band-Aids. Emma scraped her elbow when she fell down, and Tommy has a bruise on his arm." The SWAT officer looked around the classroom, noting the complete absence of fear in the children's faces, the way they seemed to view their crossing guard as an island of safety in what should have been the most terrifying experience of their young lives. "Roger that, sir," he said. "We'll get the paramedics in here right away." As the all clear was given and the lockdown lifted, word began to spread through the school and then through the community about what had happened. But the story that emerged wasn't quite accurate. People heard that the crossing guard had somehow been involved in stopping the attack, that he'd helped keep children safe,
that he'd been in the right place at the right time. What they didn't hear, what Charlie made sure they didn't hear, were the details that would have changed how the children saw him forever. The police report was filed with careful language that emphasized his role in protecting students while minimizing the tactical aspects of what had actually occurred. The media coverage focused on the heroic crossing guard who went above and beyond, not on the highly trained special operations veteran who had neutralized 3 armed attackers with methods that belonged in a war zone, not in elementary school. Charlie went home that afternoon, hung up his reflective vest, and sat in his small apartment, staring at a medal he'd never displayed and commendations he'd never framed. For the first time in 5 years, he wondered if he'd made the right choice in taking a job that was supposed to be simple and safe. But the next morning, at 7:30 sharp, he was back at his position on the corner of Maple and 3rd Street. Emma Rodriguez was the first to reach him, running ahead of her mother with her backpack bouncing and a huge smile on her face. "Mr. Charlie," she called out, throwing her arms around his legs in the same fierce hug she'd given him the day before. "I told my mom you're the best crossing guard in the whole world." Behind her, Tommy Chen approached more slowly, but with the same trusting smile he'd worn every morning for 5 years. Maria Santos whispered, "Buenos dias," in the shy voice that never failed to make Charlie smile. Other children gathered around him with the same easy affection they'd always shown, chattering about homework and lost teeth and weekend plans as if nothing had changed, because for them, nothing had. Mr. Charlie was still Mr. Charlie, the man who kept them safe, who remembered their birthdays, who always had Band-Aids when they needed them.
The parents were different, though. They looked at him with a new kind of respect, a deeper appreciation for what he did every day. Some approached him directly to say thank you, to shake his hand, to ask if there was anything they could do for him. "You already do it," Charlie told them. "You trust me with the most important thing in your lives every single day. That's more than enough." Mrs. Patterson, Emma's teacher, stopped by during her lunch break to bring him a card signed by every child in her class. Inside was a drawing Emma had made of Mr. Charlie standing at the crosswalk with his stop sign, surrounded by stick figures of children with huge smiles. At the bottom, in Emma's careful first-grade handwriting, it said, "Mr. Charlie keeps us safe, always." The principal offered him a raise, which he declined. The school board wanted to give him an award, which he politely refused. The local newspaper wanted to do a feature story, which he avoided by simply not returning their calls. Because Charlie Morrison understood something that most people didn't. True service wasn't about recognition or rewards or having your name in the paper. It was about showing up every day and doing what needed to be done, whether that was helping children cross the street safely or stopping armed men from hurting them. He'd spent 23 years serving his country in ways that couldn't be acknowledged. Now he was spending his retirement serving his community in ways that couldn't be fully understood. The mission was different, but the commitment was the same. 3 months later, on a quiet Tuesday morning, a new family moved into the neighborhood. The mother was nervous about her 5-year-old son starting at a new school, worried about whether he'd be safe, whether the teachers would be kind, whether he'd make friends. As they approached Jefferson Elementary for the first time, she saw an older man in a reflective vest standing at the crosswalk. He had kind eyes and a gentle smile, and when he saw her son hesitating at the curb, he knelt down to the boy's eye level. "Hi there," he said in a voice that immediately put the child at ease. "I'm Mr. Charlie. I help all the kids get to school safely. What's your name?" The boy whispered his name, still shy but no longer scared. "Well, it's very nice to meet you," Charlie said, extending his hand for a formal handshake that made the child giggle. "I think you're going to love it here. And don't worry, I'll be right here every morning to make sure you get across the street safely." As they crossed together, the mother noticed how the crossing guard's eyes constantly scanned the area, how he positioned himself between her son and any potential danger, how he moved with a kind of alert competence that spoke of experience she couldn't quite place. She also noticed how the other children called out to him with genuine affection,
how parents nodded to him with respect that went beyond politeness, how teachers emerging from the building smiled at him like he was family. "He's wonderful," she said to another parent. "How long has he been the crossing guard here?" 5 years, the other mother replied. "We're lucky to have him. Mr. Charlie takes care of all our children like they're his own." What she didn't say, what she would never say, because some stories are too important to tell carelessly, was that 6 months earlier, Mr. Charlie had proven exactly what that meant. And so, Charles Edward Morrison continued his quiet service, standing at the corner of Maple and 3rd Street every school day, keeping children safe in ways both seen and unseen. The Medal of Honor stayed in his drawer. The commendations remained unframed. The stories of his previous service went untold. But every morning, 26 children in Mrs. Rodriguez's class started their day knowing that Mr. Charlie was watching over them. Every afternoon, parents drove home knowing their children had made it safely across one intersection because a man who had once protected his country now protected their most precious gifts. Some heroes wear uniforms and carry weapons and fight battles that make headlines. Others wear reflective vests and carry stop signs and fight smaller battles that never make the news, but matter just as much. Charlie Morrison had been both kinds of hero. The first kind had earned him medals and recognition from his government. The second kind had earned him something far more valuable: the trust of children who believed absolutely that as long as Mr. Charlie was there, everything would be okay. And in the end, that trust was the only recognition he'd ever wanted. So I ask you now, have you ever met someone like Charlie Morrison? Someone who served quietly, protected others without fanfare, and found their true calling in the simplest acts of daily courage. Share their story in the comments. Tell us how they touched your life. Because here at the Human Stories, we believe that every community has guardian angels who never ask for recognition. They just show up, day after day, making the world a little safer for those who trust them. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please subscribe and share it. Help us honor the quiet heroes who protect us in ways we may never fully understand. And the next time you see a crossing guard, a security guard, or anyone whose job is to keep others safe, remember that you might be looking at someone whose service goes far deeper than what meets the eye. We'll see you in the next story. And until then, if you ever meet someone who makes you feel safe just by being there, don't forget to say thank you. They may be carrying more responsibility and more history than you know.